Well, with us now is Rob McKenzie from the Road Haulage Association, which represents lorry drivers and haulage companies. Thanks very much for being with us. What did you make of the Brexit Secretary's comments?
Well, I think it's astonishing, Sophie, that the man in charge of our Brexit negotiations didn't quite realise that the Dover-Calais run is kind of important to the British economy and to the Brexit deal. Let's make it very simple for him to follow. There are 4 million lorries a year that go from Dover to Calais and back again. That's a lot of lorries supplying most of the stuff that we need in Britain. And at the moment, they roll on and roll off those ferries, no checks. Now, if we have a hard border, if we have a no-deal Brexit, there would suddenly be customs checks. And the tiniest check will create the most massive delays. We've not done the work to prepare for a no-deal Brexit.
Well, let's go back to the comments made by Dominic Raab. I mean, there is an argument, isn't there, that this is refreshing honesty from a politician. And it's one thing, isn't it, reading about the importance of that Dover to Calais link, and another thing to actually visit, for example, and then I think it's only then really that you perhaps understand how important that artery is. So do you think we should not be a bit more kind towards him?
Well, I think if you're the Brexit Secretary and you're in charge of the negotiations, you should be a bit better briefed on it. If he was a junior minister at I don't know, another department, you might forgive him. But I think it's important that he knew about this before he was negotiating. And let's contrast his comments with those of David Davis yesterday, who used to do his job, who said all this nonsense about delays at the ports. It's all nonsense. It's all got up by people who are anti-Brexit and scaremongering and so forth. There won't be any delays. And then suddenly we've got the current Brexit Secretary, his successor, saying something entirely different. You know, they don't exactly look joined up.
Let's talk a bit about what the reality could be, you know, at that crucial port, if there is a no-deal scenario. What could we see? I mean, what kind of cues do you think we could be looking at?
Well, look, in very simple terms, at the moment, those lorries roll between the UK and the continent on what's called a community licence. If there is a no-deal Brexit, we will lose that community licence. So the only way that British lorries could get to the other side is with a permit. And there aren't enough permits to go round. There are a couple of thousand permits, and there are around about 20,000, maybe more, lorries that need those permits. So maybe 90% of the UK businesses that need to trade with the continent and physically move a lorry from the UK to Europe won't be able to do so because they won't get a permit. Now, let's just talk about border checks. Any delay at the border, and we've got no checking, no border system at the moment, it's just roll on, roll off. Any border delay will create a queue. Dover is a pretty narrow port with not much spare room. So the government's contingency is based on creating lorry parks on nearby motorways and so forth. What would happen is any sort of delay, customs check, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes, would create a massive traffic jam on the approach road to Dover, connecting motorways, the M20, M26, possibly the M25, possibly other roads that feed into it.
So how many miles are we talking about here, then?
Well, it's difficult to predict, but if I could, maybe the viewers will kind of understand if there is an accident on a motorway and all 3 lanes are blocked, and the traffic's not going anywhere, and there isn't another junction further down to feed traffic off, in a very short space of time, you have a very, very long queue. And I think 20-mile queues are not a product of my imagination.
20-mile queues, you know, does sound quite startling. I mean, there's been talk as well, hasn't there, about, you know, shortages in the shops, shortages of food and so on. I mean, do you think that's realistic? Well,
it's hard to tell, and obviously I can't predict what will happen. But 98%, 95% really of everything that we have in the UK comes on the back of a lorry at some point. Not necessarily across the channel, but lorries are very important to the UK economy. Now, if you choke off supplies and goods that come in from the continent, you will have a very different retail sector. You'll have a very different supermarket shelf. The things that we've got used to in the last 30 or so years, the range of products, both consumables, food, everything else, is because of the trade links that we've had.
And this is like fruit and vegetables, stuff like that you're talking about.
Exactly. So your Spanish tomatoes, if they're stuck in a queue on the other side, and that queue is long and takes several days to clear, the just-in-time supply chain, which is what the UK is built on, will mean that those tomatoes, if they arrive in your supermarket, may be past their sell-by.
I mean, some people might be listening to this and be picturing you as, a typical Ramona, someone who isn't supporting British farms. And actually, perhaps there is an argument, you could say, that we should be buying more locally. We shouldn't be so reliant on Spanish tomatoes, as you say.
Unfortunately, we don't produce enough produce in the UK to supply the people of the UK. So we rely on imports. That's how the economy works. As for being, pouring cold water on this whole idea, we don't have a view whether Brexit is a good or bad thing. What we want is a deal that means the borders that exist now, the border arrangement that exists now, which is frictionless, roll on, roll off, continues after March. It's interesting to see how different countries prepare. We've heard that the Calais authorities are preparing for a no deal by putting porter cabins in so that they can at least maybe have some customs checks. The UK is preparing by putting portaloos in so that lorry drivers can use the loo on the motorway. Well, that's important too, but portaloos, porter cabins, it's a difference of approach that worries many in haulage and should perhaps worry many in business.
Very interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Sure.